my YouTube station at Michael Cross. It's Michael Cross says, Michael Cross Freedom of Conscience after my book series. And I've got dozens of shows recorded. Also check out articles I've written on this subject and many others at my website at michaelcross.net. Okay, well, tonight, I'm not going to disappoint you. We have a really great guest. Her name is Dandra L. Brown, and she's an author and counselor, and she deals with the subject of psychopaths, which, in today's world, if you turn on the TV, they're there. But not just out in the world of politics, but also many people face this kind of thing at home. So anyway, Dandra, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you started in this really interesting field.
Thanks for having me on tonight, Mike. I appreciate it. I feel like I entered the field of psychopathology on May 13th, 1983, when my father was murdered by someone with a very long criminal career that looks very much, smells very much, acts very much like psychopathy. And I was not in the psychology field at that time. I was just a 20-something-year-old working in the marketing field when this happened. And, of course, in a moment's eye, my life was changed in that moment. And I could not conceive of a mind that could stab someone to death. And so that sort of began my interest in reading about low conscience disorders and what was related to that. I was sort of a late bloomer. I didn't go to college until I was 30 following the murder, and wanted to help, other people who had been impacted by the issue of low conscience. I still didn't know what that meant totally until in my master's degree program when I started studying personality disorders and psychopathy. And so since that time, which has been over 25 years, my practice has been solely focused on partners who have been in relationships with people that have, personality disorders and psychopathy. But I came in through the door of victimization. That's how I ended up becoming interested in the topic.
Well, I cannot even relate to that. The idea that, a family member being murdered, I think that's everyone's worst nightmare.
Well, absolutely. And, trying to understand who does that. That had been, a guiding mantra for me in trying to understand the whole issue of no conscience. It's the path that led me, to the work. And to the understanding about how psychopathy impacts everyday life. These are the people that are the most destructive people on the planet, and that cause, unimaginable kinds of harm. As we know, not all psychopaths end up in prison. Most of them live next door to us and work with us and date our daughters and sons. But by far, they do the most damage.
Well, it sounds like that until you started studying the issue, that I think like most people then, you were under the impression that everyone thinks the way that most people do, that you think that everyone has compassion, everyone has a conscience.
Yeah, until you are faced with a situation that makes you question what is conscience. Absolutely. And I think that's normal. We see the world through who we are, which is what puts us at risk for psychopaths when one is not a psychopath, because human nature is that we tend to see the world through who we are, and we see others and evaluate others through who we are. And when we have a conscience, we project, those positive traits and even human motivation onto other people. And, it's not until you meet someone without a conscience that your world is changed, and we're introduced to that other side of, I don't know if I even want to call it humanity, but that other side.
Well, I use the analogy when it comes to psychopaths and I'd like you to go into this into a lot more depth that I'm going to take this, but if you liken the human conscience to a computer, and when you're looking at the bars saying how much internet connection you have, if you're on full, you get like 5 bars light up. But if you're on some sort of Wi-Fi system and it's a really weak signal, then you're on like a 1. I mean, you're still getting something, but it's not much. You think that's the way a psychopath, that's how their conscience is? It's just so little that, or do you think it just doesn't exist at all? I mean, what's your opinion of that?
Well, we work sort of in the whole cluster of what we call low conscience, which is, cluster B personality disorders all the way up through and including psychopathy. And I call that the low conscience spectrum, that psychopaths, are on the high end of low or no conscience. Yeah, a narcissist, is a step down, will have some level of conscience. But in my book, Women Who Love Psychopaths, I talk about this issue about reduced conscience, and that this is the factor that causes inevitable harm. It is that it's our conscience that directs our behavior and our moral and spiritual context. It's what puts the brakes on behavior. And when you have not enough conscience, whether that is narcissism or whether it's full-blown psychopathy, you have the potential to harm non-pathological people. It's inevitable because there is not enough conscience to put the brakes on behavior. And so, in the book I talk about that. They don't have to be, a full-blown psychopath for you to be injured and emotionally, psychologically, physically, sexually, spiritually in a relationship. They can just have not enough conscience. That could be, narcissism or antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. But anywhere in that range of not enough conscience or low conscience is, where inevitable harm happens.
Well, I'm wondering about that because Hare's scale goes from 0 to 40, if I recall right. And most people, I mean, I've even, you have to do it you have to diagnose in a clinical setting, but sometimes in a lecture hall, you can give the test out and see how people do. And the thing is that almost everyone gets around 0 to 8. It just seems that that's the norm. And then there's a small number who get maybe 20 on it. And then, of course, there's the ones that get 30 and above. I've never actually encountered someone with a 30 and above, when it comes to giving the test. I've interviewed a couple of people who scored higher than that and are diagnosed. But would you say that, what is that term? Is it like if you score around a 20, is that a red flag? Is that kind of a borderline psychopath? Someone that maybe there's like a yellow light going up instead of a red light, but it still has a lot of those characteristics?
They could be trait oriented, as they say. Here's the PCLR, the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, is solely for psychopathy. When people come in through the Institute, we try to assess the partner's descriptions of the behavior and lifestyle of their partner. And sometimes it will often fall within like full psychopathy or psychopathic traits. But we also assess for the other, low conscience disorders. So we look, at borderline, narcissist, antisocial, and psychopathic. And so Hare's particular thing is only looking, at psychopaths, where some of the other low conscience disorders may be in there too. And we often find that the partners end up being with people who have a little bit of traits of all of it. They are narcissistic, they are antisocial, and they are psychopathic. So they're sort of a cluster, but of a different kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just a quick question here, since you brought up borderline. I mean, it sounded like you talked about also BPD, borderline personality. Do you think a lot of women, when they get diagnosed, just if there's like a cultural thing in which many women who get the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder are actually psychopaths, but we just, the psychological profession tends to kind of look at it like, well, no, men are more likely to be psychopaths, so therefore maybe she's displaying BPD, which is more aimed towards, it seems, women.
I absolutely think that there is a gender bias against diagnosing women as psychopaths. Absolutely. Years ago, I worked in a women's trauma unit, inpatient psychiatric program, and many of the women had been underdiagnosed, had been diagnosed borderline when they really were psychopathic. And I think it's still true today that there is a gender bias of that. And Barbara Oakley, in her book, Evil Genes, wrote about that issue, about borderlines and psychopaths and sort of the problem that we face in diagnosing, especially women, and was talking about, trying to merge those two into an area she called a border path. And I would love to see that happen, because I think that's exactly what often happens, is that, especially with women, is that they will be diagnosed borderline and not psychopathic. And I think that female psychopaths are a little different than male psychopaths in their presentation and in their behavior in relationships.
Oh, okay. I got to go through that there, because that's the main character in my book series is a female psychopath, and in Freedom from Conscience. And so let's see if I got it right here. What would be the difference between, let's say I've got a male psychopath and a female. How will she manifest her traits differently than the male?
I think the level of manipulation is different. I think psychopaths are known for their manipulation. Hers is much more emotionally volatile, more like the borderline, the up and down kind of stuff that makes it feel more borderline-ish. And I think there's a lot more sexual manipulation within the relationships. I think they manipulate much more on the emotional, I hate you, don't leave me kinds of stuff that we're familiar with borderlines. Yet, on a higher, more callous level, that meets more of the psychopathy piece of it. And usually very sexually violent and sexually manipulative.
Mm-hmm. Well, so far so good with character. But now it's also true too that whether it's a man or woman, they can commit a crime or do something that's really against the societal norm when it comes to harming. And they don't really they don't necessarily contemplate it afterwards. They just go on like, it was like a lunch break, and then just kind of go on with the next phase or whatever. Am I correct in that?
Yes. I mean, short of talking about a serial killer who's, much more obsessive about the details of what they just did, but short of not talking about that psychopathy related to serial killing, no, whatever happens. They are very, very much here and now. And again, that's related to conscience. If people who have a conscience replay what happened, what they did, what the other person said, much less with people in that low conscience spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in other words, they could do something horrendous, and I mean, if they were working for the U.S. government in one of those prisons that were in Iraq, they could do something really nasty and then just go talk about sports or something with their friends afterwards and not even think about it.
Right, exactly. Nothing is ever, related to their behavior. So, everything's always, if something bad happens, it's always generated from someone else's behavior. I mean, part of pathology is the inability to have insight about how your negative behavior affects others. So it would never be their fault. Whatever happened, whether they beat somebody up or whatever they did, it would never be about their own behavior. So yes, they are, quick to move on to get reoriented to the here and now.
Mm-hmm. Now, it sounds like a psychopath that, I mean, obviously, since they're not all in jail, then some of them must find a way to deal with society in general and to at least work within the confines. Have you found that psychopaths are more cognitively oriented in the sense that they look at everything from maybe the old business school thing, the cost versus the benefits, the cost-benefit analysis? Is that the way they make decisions?
Mm-hmm. Well, everything is an opportunity. Paul Babiak and Robert Hare wrote Snakes in Suits, which talked about the rise of white-collar psychopathy in our country, and because low conscience serves well in certain careers, and so for psychopaths, everything is an opportunity, and when there's not the hindrance of conscience, of feeling bad about anything you have to do in order to achieve and reach, that opportunity, then the sky's the limit. And it is why psychopathy is often referred to and looked at as a skill set. And it is a skill set.
Mm-hmm. Hey, real quick question. The thing is, it seems to me that there must be some sort of ability if the person is at low emotional level. In some ways, that sounds like Asperger's syndrome, and I know it's actually in many ways there's an overlap, but almost opposite. Yeah, at least that's the way I understand it. In that maybe as children they start out not being able to understand emotion, but what do you think enables them to be able to mimic emotions so much better than, people I know that have Asperger? They have to take classes on how to learn how to look at facial features to determine if this person's angry or sad or whatever. What enables the psychopath to almost be able to do this at the subconscious level without actually feeling the emotions that actually an Asperger would, except they don't know how to express it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, absolutely. And again, that goes back to the issue about the skill set that they are psychopathic, from childhood. And so, as a child being raised, and is struggling with not having the entire emotional spectrum of feelings, they have to learn to compensate for that, and have to learn early on how to compensate for not having the full emotional spectrum. So they become little human psychologists. They do learn to that when someone's face looks like this, then you say this. And to me, even though Asperger's has the low emotionality and those kinds of factors, it's not generated from the same thing as in psychopathy. But, psychopathic children have decades in order to perfect the skill set that makes them, as Hervé Cleckley said, that the mask of sanity that helps them to appear normal in society. So they learn very early on how to compensate for things they don't feel, and for things that they can't emotionally generate in relationship to non-pathological people.
Mm-hmm. So, in other words, if they see their friends maybe sad over something that's happened, and they don't feel anything, they may start wondering, well, I must be different because I don't feel anything, but people are going to think I'm weird if I don't show some sort of sympathy, at least outward signs of sympathy.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's where they learn that compensational skill of mimicking and parroting is early on. I had a psychopathic male in group years ago, and he talked about having come home from school. He was younger. He had an older sibling who was not psychopathic, and they came home, and their mom was there. She was on the couch crying. She had a black eye, and she said, your dad hurt me, and he left, and I don't know how we're going to make it. And the non-pathological child went to her and comforted her. He patted her. He said, I'll get a newspaper route. We can move in with Grandma and Grandpa. He showed empathy. The psychopathic child didn't have a reaction, didn't verbalize anything, and said he thought in his mind at that moment, good, I always hated that bastard. I'm glad he left. But never verbalized it. And the mother said, boys, go outside so I can, regroup myself here. And so when they went outside, the non-pathological brother said to him, what is wrong with you? she was hurt, she was crying, and you just stood there with this blank look on your face and you did nothing. And the non-pathological brother punches the psychopath in the eye. And the psychopath said he learned at that time, in that moment, that he did not have the same skill set, that there was something different with him, that he should have felt something he didn't feel, and he should have done something that he didn't do, and that behaviors and emotions were connected, and that he did not feel that connection. And since he never wanted to get punched in the eye again, what did he have to learn to do in order for that not to happen? And he talked about early on in his childhood, learning about mimicking and parroting, about the skill set he needed to develop to compensate for what he was not internally experiencing.
So it's similar to if you're a character actor in a movie and there's a scene in which you have to display incredible fear or incredible joy or incredible sadness. Sometimes when you're first starting out, you have to stand in front of a mirror and try to mimic these things. And this is a process you say they have decades to do, and they can learn to do it so that they actually do seem genuine.
Well, it would be like, a scene in a play. As adults, we might stand in the mirror and practice, but they start practicing as children. They don't need to practice anymore. And, to a large degree, with neuroscience now, we know that, psychopathy has, a lot of hardwired features. And so the story I just told gives an example of sort of the emotional developmental issues related to psychopathy. But there's also, the neuro parts of psychopathy in which they are hardwired. And so to a large degree, I'm not sure that the ability to compensate has to be taught. I mean, I think, again, it goes to the hardwired skill set that for some, during the emotional development period, they may realize they don't have skills that other people have, and they learn to compensate. And I think that there are other types of psychopaths that are just naturally hardwired, that they don't even have to think about compensation. It just naturally occurs for them.
Very interesting. Now, I'd like to get into more of your work with victims and so forth. And so I'd like to reintroduce, if people have tuned into the show just now, we are with Sandra L. Brown, and she is the author of Women Who Love Psychopaths. And I've been looking at the reviews, it seems like fantastic reviews. People love your book. And I would just encourage people to check it out. And while you're at it, you check out my website at michaelcross.net, and also my YouTube station at Michael Cross, the Michael Cross that, is listed with Freedom from Conscience. Sandra, in the second half here, could you again just kind of a quick review, what exactly is a psychopath, just summed up? You there, Sandra?
In and out quite a bit, Mike.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes, that is better.
Okay, great. So now that our Skype's working again, I just wanted you to maybe just a really, really quick recap for those that just tuned in. What exactly is a psychopath?
Psychopath is a disorder related to superficial, shallow, callous, lack of conscience and empathy, people that are highly manipulative and impulsive, poor behavioral controls. that cause incredible damage to non-psychopathic people.
You know, I was going to bring this up in the first half. You were originally in marketing. Did you see people that after you got out of marketing, you kind of reflected thinking, wow, he or she, I think they were psychopaths?
Well, after I started working in the field of psychopathy, yes, I can look back now and think of all sorts of people in my life growing up, neighbors, teachers, clergy, lots of people that I now know were somewhere on that low conscience spectrum. So, yes, and I think that's the issue about why the Institute that I'm involved in does what it does is for public pathology education, because most countries very poorly, educate the public about pathology, despite that, it's one of the leading mental health problems in any country, both for the psychopath and for the psychopath's victims, and that we don't have enough public pathology education teaching other people what pathology is and how to spot it and how to get away from it.
Mm-hmm. You say you work with primarily partners of psychopaths. Does that also include people that were they know that one of their parents or maybe both of their parents were psychopaths? And
yeah, yes, we have people that contact us because they feel that there was a family member who was psychopathic and they've been impacted by, early childhood exposure to psychopathy, or we have partners who are leaving relationships with someone in the low conscience spectrum and needing, recovery support in order to recover.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell, you must have some sort of way of kind of being able to sift out the people who just feel hurt by someone, because I think everyone can hurt someone. The ones
Right.
that just feel that they've been abused by a partner, and the ones that you can determine really were psychopathic partners.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mostly we use the Robert Hare's PCLR traits. There's also Robert Hare developed an instrument called the P-scan, the psychopathy scan, which is for family members or outside people who can identify the behavior. And so we use that, and we also use the DSM criteria for narcissism, antisocial as well. And so I think really what differentiates from merely an abusive relationship, it has a lot to do with the callousness and to me, one of the traits, the gaslighting that happens, that normal people in relationships, even when they're breaking up, don't seek to control someone else's reality. And psychopaths love that. And the other disorders with low conscience. That whole issue of power and control, and we know, sort of about the power and control stuff that's talked about in domestic violence circles. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the whole issue of controlling someone's reality. Because when you want to gaslight someone to that degree, to control how they see themselves, others in the world, that's a different level of pathological manipulation. that normal people, even in a bad relationship, don't engage in.
Well, how would they control someone's reality? Let's say you've got a person who, let's say you have a person in a relationship who is being, I've heard this term, it seems to be getting very popular, and I guess it has something to do with a movie from the 1950s, but gaslighting. And I'm not quite sure how that works in the sense of how a psychopath would go about altering this. It seems like it's on the cerebral level. Could you go into that in a little detail?
They like to alter your sense of what you see, hear, and experience. For instance, one of our clients came home early from work and caught her psychopathic husband in their bed, with someone else. And she went into the room, she yelled and screamed, she threw stuff at them, she grabbed the woman by the hair, jerked her out of her bed. I mean, she had interactions with them. She got very angry, stormed out of the house, got in her car, drove away, got down the street and thought, heck no, I'm going back and dealing with this. And so she goes back to go at it again with him. And by the time she gets back, the girl is gone. He's laying on the couch watching TV. And she comes in and, just starts right back up into the conversation about the betrayal. And he's looking at TV and he says, "What are you talking about? Are you okay? I've been worried about you for a while. You haven't been acting the same. Would you like for me to drive you to the hospital? I think you need to be checked." That's gaslighting, when the desire to manipulate someone's, you didn't see what you see, you didn't hear what you heard, you didn't experience what you experienced. In 25 years, I have never heard of a relationship with a psychopath that didn't try to do some level of gaslighting.
Can that also include altering the person's belief system, breaking them away from their family, trying to rebuild them from the ground up, sort of like erase whatever program is in their mind and put something else in?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the whole, for them, power and control stuff. Not like what we hear in domestic violence circles, but the ultimate, yes, rebuilding from the ground up, every part of them. It's not that different from cult mentalities. The kinds of stuff we saw with people coming out of cults that gaslighted, they gaslighted them to alter their reality so they could dismantle them and rebuild them from the ground up.
So when someone comes in and you've determined that yes, they were involved with someone, let's start. Okay, let's actually, because everyone's waiting for the relationship thing. Let's start with the question I had about someone comes in and they realize that their parents or parent has been this way. That they've had a lot of problems, I guess, in life, and maybe they come in their early 20s. What kind of problems does that cause for a child of a psychopath, whether it's the mother or father?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, power and control issues. A lot of our people that come in are people that are engaging in relationships as adults with psychopaths. We have had people come in who have had pathological parents, and they've got a lot of them have addiction issues, trust issues, the typical dysfunctional family kinds of outcomes that you have, but much, much more elevated. Many of them, even without violence, that were in families with pathological parents, have post-traumatic stress that was not generated from levels of violence. And that goes a little contrary to what people normally think related to PTSD, but they have a lot of intrusive thoughts and cognitive dissonance. He's good, people are good, they're bad, I should be here, I should not be here. But again, most of our clients come in as people not having had normal parents and ending up in a relationship with a psychopathic partner. And we were interested in why people who did not have traumatic backgrounds, we can understand why people who might have had a parent that was a psychopath would repeat. It's kind of that trauma reenactment. We understand that. We understand why people who had psychopathic partner or parents end up with psychopathic partners. What we couldn't understand was why people who came from normal families ended up with psychopathic partners. And very often in psychology classes, we were always taught about the strength of the family unit, and especially with girls and fathers relationships, that one of the prevention keys for women ending up with violent men was a strong, healthy relationship with their father. And we didn't find any of that to be true. About half of our women might have had a pathological somebody in their past, an uncle, a sibling, whatever, but half of them did not. And that's where we got interested in if this is not trauma replay, what is it? What is going on? Why people would end up with psychopathic partners.
Mm-hmm. So are there variables that you found that seem to explain it, or is it just that the psychopath, male or female, is very good at seduction and bringing someone into their world?
Well, they certainly are. That is one of their skill sets. And so that for a long time we believed it was only that psychopaths are good at that. But they're also smart, and so they know what works for them. And so I really had to believe that there was a pattern to their selection. They're not just throwing a bunch of crap against the wall and see what sticks. They have figured out what works for them. In all their deficiencies, in all of their strengths, what kind of person makes the best and easiest partner for them. And so, yes, we just concluded a research project with Purdue University in which we tested 800 women that had been in relationships with psychopathic male partners, and found personality trait elevations, significant personality trait elevations, at the heart of what a psychopath is likely seeking. I don't think normal people seek psychopaths. Psychopaths seek target select, and they know what works for them. And so, there are we now know that there are personality traits that make someone a pretty good target for a psychopath.
Yeah, what would some of those be?
We use the 5-factor model, which is a really popular personality assessment type of tool, and they tested very high in what they call the cooperation group of traits that would include high levels of trust, altruism, empathy, being very open, warm, and so very conscientious, resourceful, helpful, loyal, and these trait elevations were not just a little bit; they were really very elevated, and so, there's been, because of psychopathy and Asperger's, etc., there's been a lot of study about empathy, about not enough empathy. We know, psychopathy has lower levels of empathy, but so does, the whole autism spectrum shows lower empathy. But we haven't studied what happens when someone has too much empathy, the whole hyper-empathy, high levels of blind trust, what we would call blind trust, and altruism. And so this is sort of the beginning of looking at, can there be a problem if someone has too much empathy, too much trust? And it certainly makes sense in understanding a balance why a psychopath who has no empathy would pick someone who has too much empathy, because it's the only way that the relationship might sort of feel normal in the beginning, that someone with hyper empathy can cover, 3 times, the lack of empathy. It carry that load in the relationship, at least until she recognizes, what's going on. And so I think we'll start seeing a lot more studying of this issue about the hyperempathy and blind trust and some of these trait elevations that psychopaths seem to be able to figure out fairly early on in their patterns of selection. Again, some of the psychopathic males I had in group, when I asked them, how do you pick a partner, they said early on that they would give a sad story, like a child abuse story. And that if the person had a response and they were empathetic to that, or trying to be helpful or resourceful, like, oh, you should get a therapist, or, oh, have you ever read this book, or whatever, that would be a green light for them to pursue. But if someone said to them, well, sorry for your luck, and, walked away, that was not someone they were going to track down in a cocktail party. So they baited by testing for empathy.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, it seems like they're either at the subconscious level trying to compensate for their own lack of empathy, or they are targeting people that they can, manipulate in a cult-like manner.
Yeah, I would not say they are trying to compensate, because especially in the empathy area, I think they've figured out pretty well that their lack of empathy has worked really well for them. I think it's more baiting, trait seeking, for a relationship, more than it is any kind of compensation in that area.
In all of your work, have you actually ever encountered a person who was, let's say, one person in the relationship was borderline and the other one was psychopathic?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's like gasoline and fire. Some of the worst cases I've ever had, the most violent cases, were when both parties had some kind of personality disorder. One was borderline, narcissistic, antisocial, any of those, or all of them. And the other one was psychopathic. And we could call that, the Jerry Springer show in some ways, Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
like the kind of daytime stuff. But in all truth, those were some of the cases where the fatalities are very, very high, because you have two people with low conscience and low impulse control, in which you add some addiction problems to it and some mood disorder problems, then it's inevitable harm.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, again, I integrated that in my first book. But the thing is, it seems like that, at least the image I get, is that borderlines tend to be very emotional and can erupt. But at the same time, psychopaths can actually be kind of the Hannibal Lecter, very cool, calm, and collected, and maybe not even react during an entire episode. And, when you said the thing about Jerry Springer, that kind of reminded me of some of those shows where he might have the person's confronted, one person's screaming and yelling, the other one's just sitting there like, oh, this is interesting, like that, and then they're able to sweet talk the other person. It seems like there'd almost be an attraction, but also a volatile nature of that relationship.
Absolutely. And, the whole issue about psychopathology, we only work in the realm of the cluster B and psychopathy combinations. But within that, it's
Okay, you back on there?
Yep, I'm back.
Okay,
So,
great. Continue with where you were at there.
We work within the whole cluster B psychopathology combination. And so, I think when you get relationships like that, it's a lot like a cocktail. So there is, the psychopath may have, a big splash of psychopathy and a few drops of borderline and a couple gulps of narcissism, but the next borderline might have, or the next pathological person might have much more narcissism or much more borderline and a little bit of psychopathic traits. And so a lot of it has to do with the mixture of the cluster B disorders. You start seeing a lot of that emotionality when you get people who have, borderline in the combination. But, over 60% of people who have one personality disorder have more than one. So in the 25 years that I have done this, when people come in, the first thing we do is we try to assess the partner. They're not with them, but using the DSM and sort of the behavioral history to see, what combination are we talking about. And I would say 70% of the time they have traits of borderline, narcissistic, antisocial, and psychopathic. One of those will be stronger. And when you start seeing, a lot of the mutual emotionality and a lot of the mutual impulse control problems, you usually have, strong borderline and strong antisocial factors.
Wow. I guess the kids from that relationship wouldn't have an enjoyable Norman Rockwell sort of upbringing, would they?
Well, not only that, but, personality disorders have high transmittable rates. It does matter who you have children with. Genes do matter. And when you get two parents, that have personality disorders, just like, addictions. I mean, that there is a hereditary factor, that personality disorders are not just environmental, that they are genetic. And so, yes, the kids, have a good chance of having personality disorders themselves, and then add the environment of what it's like to have two personality disordered parents, and the Jerry Springer every day in your living room kind of living arrangement, and yeah, you get some pretty messed up kids.
Yeah, I can imagine. Hey, I have a lot more questions I'd love to ask, but we're coming up on the end of the show here. Could you tell our listening audience how they can get in touch with your organization, as well as how they can find out how to get one of your books? Especially looks intriguing, Women Who Love Psychopaths.
They can contact us through saferelationshipsmagazine.com, and we are the Institute for Relational Harm Reduction. And the book, Women Who Love Psychopaths and How to Spot a Dangerous Man Before You Get Involved, are available on our website and through Amazon.
Well, I would really highly recommend people look at it. This has been very, very interesting and enlightening, time to learn about what goes on, not just in the abstract form, but also at the interpersonal level when it comes to psychopathy. So thank you very much, Sandra.
Thank you, Mike, for having me on. Enjoyed it.
Okay, well, thank you. And to our listening audience, thank you for tuning in this week to Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions.
You can catch every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.